Welcome to the Lifetime Training Podcast. I'm Jason Stella, your host, and today I am so excited to bring you Dr. Kelly Starrett. He's been a guy that I've been trying to get on this show for a while, and we finally locked him in. So thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Total pleasure. Look, I don't know where you got the dirt on me to leverage to finally get me here, but you know, I've been planting those nudie photos on the internet, hoping you'd find them eventually. So, man, it is a total pleasure. Great to see you again.
You know, I still remember the first time I finally met you. I went to the CrossFit Games, many years ago, back in Carson, and chatted with you. I was with a different organization, and just, it's been great to kind of see you explode beyond what's happening with CrossFit and in the ready state, and to allow people to be able to really help with this self-care topic, which is really one of the first things I wanted to dive into. Is, you've been kind of one of the first to really dive into this concept of self-care and the importance of it. Would you mind, diving into that a little bit more, and why you kind of came to really kind of come up with that topic and drive into that?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's easy to forget sometimes that I'm, on the one hand, a physical therapist, right? Classically trained physio, manual therapist. And on the other hand, I am a performance coach. And so I see both sides of the spectrum. I'm interested in more kilos and more pounds and more watts and more output and faster times. That's where I'm obsessed with. And simultaneously, on the other side, we see all the nicks and bumps, all of the scrapes and pains that are sort of normal to being a human being. And what we found was, in the classic kind of strength and conditioning training environments, we always said, pain, oh, that's a medical problem. It's not my problem. And what I found was that we were sort of living this lie that if I, was working with athletes and they had incomplete positions, who was responsible for that? I mean, I can always make it so that you can work hard, but we didn't see that there was a gap, or we saw that there was a gap between athletes and them owning their positions and being responsible for the tissue quality and having a first aid kit. So when something hurts, because by the way, you're a human being, it's going to hurt. What we found is that people didn't even know what to do. They were very complex in their eating, in their training, even in their sleep, and their tracking. But I'm like, okay, your knee hurts, go. And they're like, oh, wait around, hope it doesn't hurt, or just ignore it, or self-soothe with ibuprofen and bourbon. And what we saw was that, that's really what we were doing. And, part of this model is what we're saying is, hey, let's put position back into it so that your job is not only to get fitter and stronger, but to reclaim your native born shapes simultaneously, because that's why we train in the first place. It's not just about physiology. It's about coordination and range of motion. And then simultaneously, we need to give people a first aid kit. And what I was seeing as a physical therapist, I was like, what? Look, I just tried to flex your leg, bend your leg, and it was stuck at 90 degrees because your quads are so stiff. I'm like, do you think that somehow was related to your knee pain? And people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, imagine we're having lunch and I go to bend my elbow and I can't get my hand in my face. And you'd be like, dude, what's wrong with your elbow? And I'd be like, nothing's wrong with my elbow. I just PR'd right on my bench. And that's the kind of mentality. We just weren't connecting sort of positional quality with output. And now here's the key. I can't always say that having full range of motion or good control will inoculate you from pain, because pain is so subjective, and it matters how stressed you are, how much sleep you're getting. Do you feel loved and supported at your work and home? All of those things totally matter, what can we control? Well, sometimes we can always control quality of range of motion and quality of tissues. Man, that's part of the training environment. So when we realized that there's a huge gap, that our athletes didn't speak this language of being able to take care of themselves or do basic maintenance on themselves, they were just running hard. Let me give you an example. If you run a horse super hard, so it's like frothing and sweaty, and you just put it in the barn, it will die of pneumonia. Horses don't do that. You don't race your horse and then put it away. Yeah. The horse finishes the Kentucky Derby and then goes around the track like 17 more times, right? And that is what the opposite of what we do as humans. What we do as humans is, I was able to get out at lunch, smash myself at the gym, go back to work and sit. And so we're just what we're seeing is kind of classic adaptation errors between humans and our lifestyles. And that meant we had to create a language of saying, hey, how do I take care of this machine? How do I create greater durability?
That's awesome. And, you've said this too, and I think it all fits in there. I've heard you say the quote, "The sitting is the new smoking," and that whole concept of just what being in a computer, and nowadays people are more in a computer than they've ever been. So, when it comes to the self-care concept and dealing with mobility and stretching and all the different things that you hear out there, can you help clarify, what is the difference between mobility and stability and stretching, and why it's important to understand those things?
Yeah, it's easy to get so lost in the weeds. It was James Levine, who was one of the chief obesity researchers, who said sitting is the new smoking.
Okay.
And one of the things that we realized is that, hey, we were seeing big changes in people's sort of daily environmental selves, right? We're not designed to be static. And so it's not about sitting is bad, standing is good. I think that's too sort of reductionist. Instead, what we say is you need to be moving more, and sitting is fine, but you have to limit the total amount of sitting. So Harvard defines sedentary lifestyle as sitting more than 6 hours a day. So you're like, but I'm fit and I have muscles and I'm 6% body fat. And I'm like, and you're a disaster. Why? Because not maybe because you can't buffer that, but because you're now turning off light switches around your capacities and abilities as human. And that may be fine if all you're going to do is elliptical machine and bicep curl in the squat rack, but that's not who we are. And what we've run is an experiment where we're seeing low back pain is through the roof, back surgeries are through the roof, ACL injuries through the roof. So choose something you care about. Look, when you and I went to high school, chances of us being diabetic, 1 in 4,000. Now, chances of us being diabetic, 1 in 4. I'm talking about our kids. Doesn't matter what color you are, how much money your parents make, what school you go to, 1 in 4. And if you're a Latino male or an African-American woman, it's 2 out of 3. So what we see is, hey, there's an environment-organism mismatch. So I think to myself, well, we're clever enough because we have thumbs and, and we can move through the environment. Well, why don't we just rechange or shape our environment a little bit? So, one of the things you point out is that, suddenly people are like, okay, I need to change, or I want to do some change. Where do I begin? So, if we're talking about the tissue health, just circulation, decongestion, you've got to move more. And, an easy benchmark is you should be moving between 8 and 15,000 steps a day. And when I say 8, that's because you were on an airplane taking a red eye and you couldn't walk around enough, right? Yeah. Otherwise, I really want you to be appreciative that if you're trying to exercise, I need you to get 10,000 steps at the minimum, bench line. And that's not for any other reason than, hey, let's just circulate your lymphatic system. Let's just move water through the sewers, right? Your lymph, that's decongest. And what I'm talking about is if you've ever been on an airplane, and all of a sudden you look down and you have cankles after a long period of time, that's because you haven't been pumping your ankles. You haven't been squeezing your muscles. It's your muscle contraction that basically circulates this lymphatic system. So if you want to have healthy tissues and rock solid tendons, don't have them floating in their own poo, right? Which is your sewage system. And that's a normal process of the body. So what you see is how clever human design is, that we put movement of waste attached to our movement system, because that's the one thing that we knew we were going to be able to do no matter what. We're going to have to walk. We're going to have to get up and down, up off the ground. We're going to have to work, right? So we're going to have to be involved. Like right before we started, you said, hey, my dad still chops wood. He's had some hip resurfacing. He's had like a little bit of, surgical trauma, and yet he's going for it. But he has engaged in a life that forces him or asks him to be active. That's the magic. And the problem for us is that sometimes it's too easy with children and jobs and all the other sort of demands of being modern sort of industrial people to appreciate that we're going against some of the principles that made us human beings. So easy thing to do. If you have a hard time falling asleep, walk more. If you want to have sexier legs, walk more. If you want to recover from your hard workout better, walk more. If you want to be more creative, I didn't think that here at 47, I'm an elite coach. I coach Olympians. I coach world record holders. I coach world champions. I coach the All Blacks, walk more, right? Like that's not very sexy. So then
I've got this secret tip for you.
So sad. One of the things that we see then is, well, hey, we believe, because we work in these environments, that we see that athletes do things that work, that serve them. We are all ego-driven maniacs, right? And that if I did something and I got results, I will do that again. It's weird that we do things that don't work. And what happens around these behaviors is they go away. So stretching is a great example of this, right? Like everyone's like, yeah, I should stretch. Why don't you stretch? Well, because it didn't work, right? Or it didn't make you feel better, or it didn't make you run faster, or it didn't change some aspect of your body. You just pulled on your tissues for 30 seconds and you're like, that's uncomfortable. Yeah. And I didn't get anything out of it. So what's the first thing that's gone? Stretching, yeah. Right? I mean, I used to tell my coach, I come pre-stretch, coach, and I was like, he'd be like, whatever. And you're like, so I was like, and I'm still faster than you. It's totally fine. So, here we are, and what we wanted to do was, and we started this project, I started teaching a course on movement and mechanics in 2008. In 2010, we launched this mobility project on YouTube. And remember, the iPhone didn't have a video camera. There was no Instagram. This is the dark ages of all this.
Use the little cameras?
And, that's right. We had little cameras, and I would download it and upload it, and it would take 45 minutes. But what we realized is that if we just gave people a place to start and reframe the conversation. So we define mobility as two things. Because one of the problems with stretching is I just pull on something and I hope it works, right? And usually it's like a pec stretch and a hamstring stretch in quotation marks. And, full caveat, my physical therapy school was attached to a place called Kaiser Vallejo, which is the World Center for PNF training and neuro rehab. So when you hear the word PNF, that's proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which means I'm going to use input to help your body know where it is in space. That's what that means, right? So it's very much a movement-based approach to having your body understand what's going on. So that's my bias. So what I realized is that when we started defining the word mobility, we needed to make sure that, one, you just have the raw range of motion to get there. Like, because your capsule isn't limited by, your joint capsules aren't limited by your brain, right? Your fascia may not be limited by your brain. Your musculature, big time. And being able to control movement, big time. But if we divided mobility into two categories, one, do I have the raw range of motion? If you were unconscious on a surgical table, that's what I'm talking about. Like, you're just floppy mess, I can move you through a range of motion. But secondarily, you have to have the control and skill. So what we're trying to do is put the skill back into the movement. I mean, look at how Lifetime has changed over I'm talking about the actual gym setting has changed in the last 20 years. Like, there's sleds and functional, and I can deadlift and power clean and pull and drag and battle rope. It does not look like selectorized equipment, sit here, do the yes, no machine. I mean, what we're realizing is, hey, it's great to be big and strong. It's great to have a big set of lungs, but if you can't control that in space, it doesn't matter. So when we started talking about mobility and mobilizations, what we really trying to do is restore people's native ranges. So we weren't stretching forever. It was like, this is how we're going to mobilize across tissue systems to restore a native range of motion, and then make sure that you have the principles and technique to do that. And suddenly, then we get to capture phrases like stability. Because if you don't have access to your range of motion, you'll work around that problem. That's called being a clever human, right? If I say to you, hey, we're gonna play basketball, you don't say, well, I don't have enough range of motion for this. Yeah. I'm gonna keep my arms around. You're like, let's go play basketball, right? And so you will solve this problem. And until we begin to put positional mastery back into the training environment, which we were doing now in 2020, it's actually happening. Suddenly we can say, oh, the reason I couldn't create stable positions is because my body was working around a range of motion limitation, or I didn't have control in that position at that load or that speed. And what's great about this is, let me be clear, you're never going to win fitness. You're never going to win strength. You're never going to win like being skilled. All you can do is continue to work at it and work at it and work at it and work at it. And that's why that 50-year-old woman just takes you to task in the volleyball court, right? Because she is so skilled and you are not skilled. And we can continue to be more evolved, skilled, strong humans, let's go ahead and make sure that we have some benchmarks in there.
Yeah, something that when you say skill, obviously to develop a skill, there's repetition and looking at, my kids, I've got a 13-year-old right now that, didn't make one of his teams. So he's motivated. He's using it to push himself forward. But when we get him in the gym, he's just like loosey-goosey and he's all over. And the intention that I don't think people put into building the skill of every single movement pattern, I think is a big issue. And, what have you seen, if anything, working with, maybe some of the younger kids to help improve that skill and that connection to, here's where you should be feeling this particular movement.
Yeah.
Here's the motion that you should have.
We like to do for everyone, there's a couple things when we're working on skill, or we see skill, or we'll call it movement control as a limiting factor. What we can say is, hey, we're going to slow you down or we're going to stop you, right? And that's isometrics or tempo work. And there's a reason we say, hey, let's go slower. Let's lower that bar so you have a chance to control it. So what you can say is speed is the sport of skill, right? Like oh, you did that? Can you go faster? Great. We never coach speed. We believe that speed will happen. Athletes will have access to their speed as their positions go up. I don't ever say move faster unless I see some athlete dogging. Yeah. But what I'm looking at is, hey, does my athlete have control of what's happening? So one is we don't have any problem slowing things down. Our kids are going to be on time under tension. We're loading ligaments. We're loading tendons. All of the magic's happening. I don't need to worry about explosive. If I want to do explosive stuff, we're going to throw medicine balls and run and cut, right? But on the other side, one of the things we can do is what we call constraining the environment. So I can make it so that there's feedback so that my athletes get out of position and the system ends. And that's called a dumbbell. If I ask you to put this dumbbell over your head and all of a sudden it's out in front of your body in an untenable position, it comes down, right? And so there's no reason why we can't be using sort of that idea of constraint where I'm in a good position, I work. When I'm in a poor position, I don't work. Or if I was doing something like a burpee, for example, all I say is, hey, I want you to jump and land with your feet together. So now your feet aren't going to land like crazy ducks, turned out, right? In bad positions, arches collapse. You have to land in this good position. So as soon as our athletes understand there's a movement goal involved, and then as a coach, I do my best to constrain the environment so the athlete is automatically cued to do a better thing, then we end up seeing with much, much better movement quality. And then as you said in that sort of little intro there, it's practice. And I think what we fail to appreciate is that the gym environment is the greatest place to make mistakes. It is so safe. What's not safe is locking yourself in underneath a bench and trying to squirm your way out. I mean, that is not skill. So if you get injured in the gym, I really think I'm like, hey, something's going wrong, because this is actually the safest place on the planet for us to really explore what's going on and to make those errors. But what we haven't done for people is said, hey, that's a movement error or a less effective movement. And so what we do is we say, hey, congratulations. I see that you added another kilo to the bar today. You must be doing better, right? And you can do that until you can't do that. And so what we're trying to say is, hey, let's challenge your position. That looks good. Bar path looks good. Your elbow looks good on the bench. And also add a little weight to it. Let's add a little speed to it. Let's add a little fatigue to it. Let's already add a little cardiorespiratory demand to it. Let's add a little, right? And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, it's really hard to control that. I'm like, perfect. That's the game. Our game is to try to challenge you and the robustness of your positions and find where you break down, but have you be able to identify, I broke down in that moment. I need to go slower. I need to take one of those variables down. I need to take load down instead of always going to failure.
Yeah. And I think too, some of the, I wouldn't say unintended consequences, but the things that I think we need to bring visibility to whether it's the kids or even the adults, especially if they're not accustomed to training, is this is a perfect place. Like you said, you will fail. And the ability to fail and overcome it and fail and overcome it, which is the secret to, any success in life. And I don't think we bring enough attention to how training actually helps improve failing and then getting over it and then overcoming it.
Yeah. And recognizing that failure is part of the process. And when I mean failure is there's a breakdown in my ability to focus. There's a breakdown in my ability to generate speed. And we haven't given people the guidelines around that. I want my athletes to always be able to self-limit. So specifically, if it turns out that they're starting to lose position, look, if I take a group full of just go-getter people and I'm like, we're going to do 1 million of these. and there's $1 billion online, I'll get $1 million out. People will do whatever they need to do. We are durable, anti-fragile monsters. And don't get me wrong, if you don't believe me, go to a marathon and you'll see people coming through the marathon finish line and you're like, whoa, that's not running. I don't know what that is. That's someone finishing, right? And so
it brings me back. I did my first triathlon and I didn't really train that much for it. And I went Olympic distance. And I remember there was this, he must have been 75, 80 years old. And I was cramping up on the run. I was like back and forth. And this guy and he was hitting the heart, real hard, boom, boom, boom. And he would pass me because I would go down and I'd be like, oh man, my cramp. And I'd cramp and I'm like, I'm not letting this guy beat me. And then I'd run past him. It was like an Indian run.
Exactly.
And he would pass me and it would be back and forth. And, it was crazy.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So and then, if I put you and don't ask you to control your body or teach you what compensation looks like, when do you hey, I see we're deadlifting, we're hinging, we're swinging, and then all of a sudden you start to round, right? I don't stop you because I think you're going to get hurt rounding. I stop you because that is a terrible way to generate force, to absorb force, to breathe, to have your pelvic floor work, to stabilize, to transfer. So if all I do is value getting the weight up and hitting my percentage, you're going to do that no matter what because you're a clever human being. But what we're going to see is practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And if we go into the gym with the idea, here's my hypothesis today, I'm pressing overhead and swinging heavy kettlebells. How do I know when I've lost position or I've lost force or I've exceeded my stimulus? And that means I got to educate my people a little bit more. They're not just a piece of inorganic meat, like cyborg just out there slaying it, and don't get me wrong. There are ways for me to cook you what we call high physiology, low skill. And I'll say, let me introduce you to the spin bike. Let me introduce you to the sled. Let me introduce you to the prowler. Here's the assault bike, right? And all of a sudden, I can kill you in positions that aren't going to make you worse at life, that aren't going to interrupt the transference of what happened. Because what we learned, remember, those guys who would leg press every weight plate in the right, they'd steal all the 45s.
With the person sitting on it.
I'm like, okay, how well does that translate to your how well does that translate to your running in basketball? And what we said is strength solves all problems. Just get stronger and then your brain, it's not true. We ran that experiment that we see that coordination and intramuscular coordination and fitness and all of these other capacities are very much dependent on being able to control that strength. So what's nice is one, we can put the skill back into training, and two, we suddenly have athletes realize, hey, I can't get into this position, right? I don't have access to this shape. So now we have a whole different language of positional restoration work, which is the mobility work. So we suddenly, when people are saying, hey, I realize that I can't do this range of motion, I don't have access to it. I don't know why, it doesn't matter, right? We're agnostic about that. You're a grown ass person who has gone through trauma and injury and you're balancing your life. We just realized today you can't put your arms over your head. So downward dog is gonna suck. Pull-ups are going to suck. Snatching is going to suck. Anything, swimming is going to suck. And again, I don't care how you got there, but what we want you to realize is, oh man, I had to struggle to put my arms over my head today. So it turns out that when we can join a mobility practice with things that people care about, right? Better position, better efficiency, better biomotor output, we get them. Right? And then they're like, well, I did that mobility practice before I went to bed and I slept better and I fell asleep faster. I'm like, oh, weird. Oh, and that weird pain in my shoulder went away. I'm like, I don't know why that happened, but that's cool. Yeah. So suddenly what we see is, man, with a little bit of effort, 10 or 15 minutes in the evening, or I throw one mobilization before I train, suddenly what we realize is the training environment is the environment where I get to talk about nutrition and stress and tribe and feeling safe and seen. It's a place where I get to talk about movement preparation and strategies and strength and coordination and skill and body. Dude, tell me it is not the medical office of the future. If you go to a good gym, you will live to be 110 years old because that is the best place on the planet and the only place to talk about these things.
Yeah, and I love it. And that is exactly, our tagline that we've just recently changed to this Live, Train, Eat. That's what it's about. It's about making sure that you understand in each one of these components, that there's something to do in each one of these. And when you bring them together, that's when, you live a healthy, happy life, and your well-being, starts to improve overall.
And you don't have to, it's not some magic pill you take, or
Yep.
it's not beyond your reach. This is so manageable. And this is crucial. I'm married to this woman who's the CEO, mother to my 2 children, world champion. If I give her more stuff, I'm like, here, you're going to take this turmeric at 2:45 and do this secret scroll. She'll kill me, right? I need this thing to run in the background, right? And I need her so that these things are hidden and buried into our lives so that we can free up our lives for the stuff that really matters. It's not body maintenance 24 hours a day. Yeah. It's, well, this is the food I have brought, or the food that I have access to, and I don't have to turn down this pizza because I'm already stuffed on eating all this meat and these vegetables, right? Yep. I had to walk. I got all my steps in today because I had walking meetings, or, it's time to go to bed at 8 and I stopped drinking caffeine at 12. Suddenly I set up my life where I don't have to make any decisions. It all runs in the background. And then I just let that work over time, and you will look better naked. You'll have more energy. You'll be more excited to play on the weekends. You're not going to be as sore. I mean, choose the thing that matters to you. We have worked it out in strength and conditioning. I guarantee you we have.
Awesome. Well, what I would love to do is, we've talked about the mobility and that type of thing. And I know you've broken down everything into different archetypes. And maybe if you can just go over, what are the archetypes, and then maybe go into one or two that, we can, kind of go a little bit deeper into.
Yeah. Imagine everyone understands the concept of vital signs, right? You know what a vital sign is. Yep. Blood pressure, heart rate, right? Everyone's like, okay, I got that. I'm like, well, how do you know when your movement has fallen below a movement minimum, right? And so what you can think of as the archetypes are ways where we have established positions that are sort of the root positions for any movement that the body does, right? So a simple one is arms overhead, right? Everyone can relate to putting your arms over your head. Well, no wonder, you know why people like the landmine press? Because you don't have to put your arms over your head. So what's nice is that we can continue to train with incomplete position, but there's a reason that the old powerlifters had the strict overhead press as part of their movement, because they recognized that that overhead position was so crucial to the health of the shoulder, right? There's a reason downward dog is there. There's a reason that all the masters around sort of animal freestyle movement do a lot of hanging and brachiating from the bars, right? There's a reason that the strict pull-up or the arm hang, flexed arm hang, is part of the Presidential Physical Fitness Challenge, because everyone recognized that being overhead. And when you look at that all of a sudden, you're like, okay, that makes sense. I see that in all of these movement traditions. But suddenly I'm like, well, what's complete? That you can just put your arms over your head and your elbows flare out, that, So when we begin to give people sort of bookends and positions, then we realize that people then can always be self-assessing. And I may not be training my arms overhead today, but maybe that's a position I can warm up, or I can hang, or do some assistance work in, get myself prepped for tomorrow. And what's amazing about our archetype concept is that we think we have like 4 good positions for the shoulder that are either coming or going through any movement you can think of. And remember, this is just a model that we created to help us explain and understand complex human movement, right? Because, man, movement is complex, but when you realize that there are these sort of bookends, these snapshots of positional competency, then it's really easy to understand. So, for example, someone says to me, my shoulder hurts. I don't want to know what muscle or where. I want to know in which movement it hurts, right? So let me give you an example. Someone says, my shoulder hurts. I'm like, what? And they're like, when I'm overhead. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So now, as an athlete, I'm like, well, I wonder if my incomplete shoulder position overhead is part of that, right? I arrive in a compensated position. My shoulder's unwound. My neck has to do weird things. And so all of a sudden, that person can then say, well, hey, I don't know if this is directly connected because there's a lot of stress in my life, but this is an inefficient position where I'll get beat swimming. So let me restore my overhead position. That's a simple place to start. But all of those movements also have a starting position. So like strict press means that we're starting what we call a front rack shape, which looks like if you had your arm straight out in a push-up, that's long lever. And if you suddenly bent that elbow in that same push-up position, kept your shoulder kind of forearm parallel to the ground, you're in a pressing shape. So suddenly I can be like, well, do you start with a good pressing position? There's a reason people like pressing kettlebells over dumbbells, because the kettlebell forces you into a better mechanical position where you're more stable, where you can create more force, and you don't have to do it because the weight is pulling you in that direction, right? So suddenly you can say, well, do I have a good start position so we can look at start position, finish position, but also you're like, no, it doesn't hurt when I press, it hurts when I snatch a dumbbell. Oh, well, that snatching the dumbbell is what we call our hang shape. Like if I was doing an upright row or a high hang pull, well, if I don't have that rotational capacity to achieve that position, my shoulder's gonna come forward, I'm gonna dump forward, and then it's really difficult to press overhead from that position. So suddenly we have this differential diagnosis, we have start position, finish position, and what I've done is created a movement language that someone can then easily understand what's going on and transfer that to their movements and their mechanics, and they can take a crack at fixing it themselves because it's not some voodoo, the shoulder's too complex for me, I'm just an Olympic lifter. Like, what are you talking about? Get in there and clean up your positions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, you used the musical note analogy. I've heard you speak, and it really resonated with me. Would you mind, going through kind of how, that analogy for us?
Well, I think the idea is, we think that the human body is so complex we can't understand. Oh, everyone is a snowflake. Everyone has a unique movement signature. Well, that's true. How you solve a problem is a little bit unique in terms of your femur and my femur are different lengths, but the principles of the movement remain constant. So, if you panned back out, I could ask any physician on the planet, what is normal range of motion for the hip? And everyone can tell me. Maybe they disagree by 5 degrees, right? Mm-hmm. But that 5 degrees doesn't matter in the conversation of how deep you should be able to squat. Do you understand? Yeah. So the difference between my squat and your squat is, well, I have really long femurs and you really have short tibias and my torso is long. So our shapes look a little bit different, but the principles and the joint ranges do not look different. They're very, very similar. So when we talk about the musical notes, there aren't that many notes. But what happens is as soon as you have the basics of being able to control that, then you can recombine and problem solve more clearly. So what we're always doing when we coach is we're always teaching to the highest expression of the movement. We never let people just say, well, that's good enough. Keep going. Someday when you're injured, let me know, or you're in pain, then we'll talk about it. We always are coaching to better and better and better and better technique. For example, in the bench press, we'll see that our best benchers will take 10 sets with an empty bar, 10 sets with 65 pounds to practice the benching. That looks a little different than 135, 225, 275, 315, right? We just keep banging big plates on there. So what ends up happening then is that when we begin to put this skill back in, we give people highest expressions of their ranges and make sure that they have the native range to do what we're asking them to do. Suddenly then you have all these other movement choices, and your brain is so fast, it's so complex that if you improve your ankle range of motion and your brain will be like, oh, look at that. I can still generate force in this position this long, or I can absorb force in this position this long. So when we return people's native ranges based on these archetype concepts, all we're doing is giving you your notes back, and your brain is clever enough to say, well, I'll use that the next time I swim. That's right. It's not like it's a weak cake-like thing that's going to, I have to mobilize them, whatever. That does not make sense. What makes sense is you can't get in this position. You're in a rich training environment. That's all you need to do. And as soon as we restore that, you start to turn the lights back on in the room. And that, we have a basic idea. When you're in a poor position, you don't generate as much force. When you're in a mechanically better position, you can generate more force. And that more force also transcribes to greater durability, greater resilience, right? More output. And that's the thing we all care about. Look, if I try to sell this to you, like, do this because you won't get injured someday, you're like, whatever, I'm not injured today. I feel great. I just crushed you, right? Like, you're trying to sell me on some warranty that I don't need. Like, I'm invincible. But if I sell you on, I think you can go faster. And that's really how I work when I work with the world's best athletes. They're the world's best athlete, but I'm like, who cares? I don't think you're the best athlete for you. I think you can still go faster for you, right? We haven't tapped. Just because you're better and faster than everyone else doesn't mean you're doing it right.
Yep. And your potential. Well, you also talk about, and again, bringing this back to the mobility side of it and the self-care is, there's the hypermobile people, and then there's the lack of mobility. And I think sometimes, so often, we think the hypermobile people are people who have all this range of motion, and you see them still trying to go even further.
That's right.
Where do you, how do you talk with that particular person, and what are the risks there?
Yeah. So when, we have, there's definitely a continuum of, we'll call it a continuum of stiffness, right? Yeah. I have plenty of middle linebackers, floating around the house and who are just stiff guys, right? And women can get stiff too, for sure. And our set of tools looks a little bit different, right? If I have someone who is hypermobile, pregnant, young woman, some connective tissue diseases, yogi, dancer, people will tend to gravitate towards these sports and these activities that allow them to express themselves. What we don't need to do is yank on their joints anymore, right? But what we need to do is maybe give them the input around motor control. So this is a useful sort of way we think about it. When we look at the body as a system, we try to break it down into some simple components. This is our systems approach. So do I think this is a joint capsule problem, right? So if I'm mobilizing, if you've ever used a band to open up your hip or overhead, that's me. You're using my techniques. And the reason I do that is that we're trying to access more of the joint capsule. Of course, we're getting fascia and muscle and the nervous system and all that's involved, but we're trying to highlight this one aspect of a limitation. So joint capsule restriction. And this is why if you rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled on a foam roller and didn't change it, it's because it may not be a foam roller problem, right? So the second thing we say is, was this a sliding surface problem? Which is our sort of shorthand catch-all for fascia, for looking at intramuscular stiffness, how well are nerves running through nerve tunnels, does skin slide over tendons, right? Like you should be like layers of warm silk sliding over steel springs. So usually when we do some kind of rolling, we're trying to implicate some of the fascial systems, right? That's what gua sha is. That's what cupping, some of those things. Suddenly you're like, okay, I understand. Acupuncture works on the fascial system. So suddenly now we're into the neuromuscular system, what I call the muscular dynamic system, which is usually what we thought we were doing. We were stretching a stiff muscle. And let me be clear, I don't really want anyone to be stretched. I want you to be springy and rad. So, I don't want you to be like a rubber band that's been overstretched. But what we see is that your nervous system may set your musculature at certain lengths where it feels like it's spending the most time because it's more efficient, or you've gotten stiff muscles because they can definitely get stiff. And so suddenly, if I take a 45-pound kettlebell and put it on your quadriceps, right? And you can't contract and relax in that position. I'm like, well, look, you've found some stiffness in the system, right? And notice that I'm not stretching and pulling on it. I'm trying to mobilize and restore how that tissue. And that may be input, that may be blood flow, that may be sliding surfaces, it could be all those things. So those are our kind of big buckets for how we kind of categorize mobilizations. And then we're into what we call the movement system, right? Where, hey, there's technique to moving. So it doesn't matter if I do all this mobilizing and then don't move. I need to move. We try to be agnostic about how you want to do that. It's totally up to you, but it's about movement. And so if you've ever heard of a corrective exercises are trying to improve your motor skill, right? They're trying to improve your motor feeling, that movement feeling, that movement aspect of the system. So I have joint capsule sliding surfaces, muscle dynamics. When I mobilize, I call those position transfer exercises. When I do corrective exercises, I call that a skill transfer exercise. But that still leaves me one bucket, which is your environmental health. That's why sleeping matters, and how you eat matters, and how stoked you are matters. All of the stress part is just as important to that. So if you're telling me I have an Achilles tendinopathy, I'm like, well, tell me about your eating and your movement, and tell me about what's happening during the day. And then we can also talk about your stiff ass calf and your poor sliding surfaces and your crappy technique, right? So suddenly you're like, oh, any one of those things can improve my feeling? Yes, the answer is yes. And until we take a systems approach, we will never, ever get to the bottom. We'll just kind of play whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And, I've recently heard, I did a podcast with a guy named Jim Lavelle, who he loves you, by the way, too. And he was talking about
smartest kid in the room, I love that guy.
And he was talking about this metainflammation and, what that's causing. And then I also then learned, and I don't know if you've heard this, but that when there's inflammation present, low-grade inflammation in the body, it's also going to take slow twitch fibers and start to tweak them a little bit more towards a fast twitch characteristic, which your slow twitch fibers are the ones that are holding the joints in place predominantly. And if they start fatiguing quicker or start contracting when they shouldn't be, there's a whole lot of issues that can go on there. So again, just,
and that's why we talk about gut health. That's why we say, look, you can't, look, people are so clever. They really are. I mean, we are all products of our environment and our system. But like when we start using activity trackers for people and we start to look at what's going on and they connect their behaviors with some kind of outcome, then they'll make change. And I think that's really, so much of managing inflammation is about diet and gut health. It really is. It's about getting enough vitamin D and sunlight and sleeping, and also feeling loved and safe. I mean, how loved and safe do we all feel right now? Like maybe we're under a little bit more stress. And so what we see is that people will reach for the self-soothing techniques that we give them. And that's alcohol and Ambien and THC, right? That's ibuprofen. How am I going to solve this problem so that I can go on with my life? Instead of actually solving the problem, we're just going around the problem. It's a temporary reprieve. But we don't fault people for that, because that is people trying to make themselves feel better. So until we can, again, low-grade inflammation, but I'm the best in the world. Well, low-grade inflammation, if I can change how you're eating or change what's going on with your gut, and you recovered faster and slept better, had nicer skin, and slayed in your 5K time trial, I've got you. And so that's why we like to use biomotor output or biomotor expression, which is a fancy way of saying movement output, as our test, because when these systems are in line, you will go faster and you'll be able to work harder. And that is really the game.
Got it. Well, I want to be respectful of your time too. I'd love, for us to dive into one more thing, and then I'd like to talk to everybody about Ready State and what you have going on there. But you mentioned different phases, and with how you would do mobility work pre-workout or post-workout, or for pain or for maintenance. Would you mind just giving a general overview there around the difference in how to put this piece thing this together?
You just need to quit your job, divorce your family, and spend full 24 hours a day on a roller doing special skill activities. No, so my doctoral work was looking at barriers to adherence, what keeps people from doing what they say they're going to do. And I'll say that this is, in physio school, I opened the gym, and in physio school, I had a baby. And in physio school, I was married to an attorney who's a rock star. So what I realized very quickly is what we felt sometimes, what we thought were best practices, there weren't realistic practices. They weren't sustainable practices. Yeah. So I started coloring very much a lot of my thinking around, when the hell is an average person gonna be able to do all of this, right? Yeah. I remember being at my gym. I had been there for like 12 hours. I had, flown in red-eyed from the night before, and I had a muscle milk, right? And I was drinking this muscle milk. And this woman who is written a bunch of nutrition books and stuff, basically publicly tried to shame me in front of my big class, right? For drinking muscle milk. And I was like, man, you don't have a job except to talk about and take pictures of your food. You don't have babies. Like, this is as good as I can do right in this minute, right? Like you need to be like, Kelly, you're eating something. That's amazing. And it's not a candy bar, right? So, what I want people to appreciate is the easiest place to begin this conversation is in the last 10 minutes before you go to the bedroom. So go ahead and grab your ball and grab your roller and roll around on the ground for 10 or 15 minutes before you go to bed. That time window, there is nothing in there. And so you're either on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're watching the news, you're chilling out Netflix, and get on the ground and put the ball or put the roller in a place where it hurts. Find something, some system. So it could be 5 minutes on your right quad, 5 minutes on your left quad. Notice I didn't say do your whole body. I just said, what's stiff, what's sore? So suddenly you're like, hey, I just have all this information about my body during the day. In the evening, I can minister to that. I can give myself a little bit of input there. And what we found then is that initial conversation of 10 minutes a day of really just simple soft tissue work is a ton of just input. We're telling the body this is where it is. We're circulating fluids. We're decongesting. We're dealing with stiffness. It's non-threatening input. It can help us relax. If you've ever had a massage, you do not jump up off the table ready to fight someone and PR on your snatch, right? What you think is, man, I feel so chill and relaxed, and your voice is deep, right? That's what happens when we're doing the soft tissue work. We start to integrate some breathing practices in there. We teach you a couple skills. So here's a simple skill. If you tonight, you want to start this conversation, don't know where to begin, don't worry. Get on the ground, put a ball or a roller, you probably have one in your house, everyone does, and put it somewhere that you think is going to be something you need to work on, right? And if you put compression to that and it hurts, you've found a problem. So not that that tissue is damaged at all, and pain does not mean damage at all. Pain is just information. But your brain is perceiving this over-tensioned system as painful. You should be like, oh, look at that. That's very interesting. Because your tissues should be painless to compression. So if I push on any part of your body, it should feel good, like a massage. So if I push on your quads and you feel like you're going to barf, we've found some stiffness in your quadriceps, right? So what you can do then is take a big breath in, 4-second inhale. This is super easy to remember, 4-second inhale, teaching yourself, hey, I own this position, I can breathe in this position. That's what we're doing here. Then I contract the muscle or the tissue and I'm working for 4 seconds. That's called an isometric. So we're doing some end range isometrics here. And then I slowly relax the muscle as I breathe out for 8 seconds. So 4-second inhale, 4-second isometric, 8-second exhale, relax. That's called tempo. Oh, you know this language already. It's the language of training. So I held you build tension. I made you hold that tension. I held you relax. And guess what happens? Your brain suddenly says, let's change that tissue spot. Suddenly it becomes desensitized. You've downgraded that threatness. So what we can say is if you can't breathe in a position, don't own a position. So if you jump on a roll or a ball and you can't take a full breath in, a full breath out, you're going too deep. So work at a pressure where you can take a full breath. Then you have 4 seconds to take that full breath, 4 seconds to hold that full breath and contract, 8 seconds to relax, and repeat that cycle until that spot doesn't hurt anymore, then move on. And pretty soon what you'll see is, wow, I just went through 5 minutes on that right leg really fast. So now let me do 5 minutes on my left leg. And that's all you have to do tonight. We'll get the rest of it tomorrow. We'll get the rest of it the day after that. And you don't even have to get the full quadriceps. Don't worry about it. But one of the reasons we see sort of these ineffective, restoration strategies that people are just trying to get their whole body done, not necessary, not necessary. Just work on an area and then work on a different area the next night.
That's awesome. Well, if you wouldn't mind going through, obviously you've got the courses that you offer that are a little bit more trainer focused that go deeper into the different tools and the different techniques. But then you've recently launched the Ready State and, which is a self-care kind of app. Would you mind explaining that to everybody? And then we'll talk about how they can go after getting that. And then.
Yeah, sure. Like a little over a year ago, we basically for about 9 years, we were a company called Mobility Workout of the Day, Mobility WOD. But the problem was that it was so technical and it didn't give the thing that I care about the most. That was still too tissue centric. The Ready State is, what is your role in society? What is your role in your family? What is it that you care about? Let's get ready for that. So by giving meaning to the action, giving context to the action, we think that's more important than mobility workout of the day. Like, we're going to improve this overhead. Who cares? I mean, your overhead sucks, but you're a world champion biker. Well, it turns out if I can get you to breathe better on the bike, you'll care. Yeah. So what we realized is that, the Ready State really talked to you about what was important to you. And we had 10 years of data where we were able to go back in and reconfigure the systems. And so basically you can come into our website and see 3 things right away. How do I just perform some daily maintenance on myself? Like we talked about before you go to bed. We have some 10-minute, 20-minute, and 30-minute follow-along videos. I'll tell you where to put the ball. I do the mobilizations. You're getting it from me. I'll guide you through, and each one of them is packed with learning. All you have to do is just plug and play. Hey, my hips are tight, or hey, look, I want to work on this, or I've never done this before, right? Go have an exploration. You can't mess it up. Second is that you can come to the site and say, hey, something hurts. So you can go to our body section, or I want to work on my knees or my calves, and you can see all our mobilizations around that. We have advanced pain techniques to help you desensitize and decongest and manage those things. And then also we have a movement section. just as we've been talking about, which is, hey, show me some mobilizations to get ready for deadlifting, and show me some mobilizations to do after I deadlift that are very specific to that position, right? And so what's nice then is you can kind of come in, choose your own adventure about that, and then, see what's going on for you. And what we'd like you to do is just appreciate that 10 minutes a day is 70 minutes a week is a lot of time and a lot of input. And what you'll find is that it's probably a better use of your time than that 7-minute ab circuit.
Yeah. Or
No, I'm just kidding.
Or that's 7 minutes on social media.
Oh man.
And so that's an app that they could download, Android or iPhone, and
Yeah, both. And we have a newer version of that coming out very soon, which we're really excited about. But the real thing is that if you sign up for the site, we have a 2-week on-ramp program. So we have a 2-week free trial. And one of the things that we try to do is in that 2 weeks, give you a primer. How do you take care of yourself? What is the basics of these soft tissue techniques? How can I start working on my positions and mechanics more effectively? Cancel after 2 weeks and you'll be already a much better athlete, person, and better prepared to just manage the realities of being a human being. Let me just be clear. If you have pain, so many of us have pain, it does not mean you're injured, does not mean you're tissue damage and threat. It means you're getting information about your body that we want to take seriously, right? And it's only when you can no longer do your job, or you have a clear mechanism of injury, or you have trauma, or you can't perform your role in society, that we want you to go see a medical professional, right? The rest of this, we really feel like, man, if you showed up and you were weak today, I would know what to do. If you showed up and you're like, hey, I went for a run and my knee hurts, we're not going to just not move. We're going to be able to take care of that. This training environment is the place to do it.
Love it. Love it. Well, man, I can't thank you enough. And there are so many things I could go on with you for days, between the desk you invented for the kids and the schools, which is phenomenal. And just, how you're getting out to try to help people take care of themselves. So, any last words that you've got? I just can't tell you how much we appreciate you, and hopefully have a fostering relationship with Lifetime into the future.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. I just want to remind people that you are built to last 110 years, no problem. I have 3 women in my family right now who are in their late 90s. And I'm just confronted with that all the time, of like the fact that we are designed to be 100. And what I want you to imagine is, what does my life look like when I'm 70 or 80? What do I want to do? Because when you're 20 and 30, you're super, super durable and more tolerant. But that durability doesn't go away. Your tolerance for silliness goes away. And so when you begin to work on these sort of fundamentals, I think what we've done is we've all settled for bodies that maybe don't do what we want it to do, or are afraid. And we just want you to realize that you are a durable rock star of an animal. And if you just give a little input and start a little bit, I'll see you in a year. I'll see you in 2 years. And it's amazing how much control you have over your body.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, and really hope you enjoy, time with your family and the weekend and all that stuff. But thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.